What's up, Scyushi Squad? We are back in some more Trove, and this is going to be one of more of those... It's going to be like a theory video, right? Because I wanted to share with you guys some class ideas that I think would be stupendous for this game. I've talked about these many times in live streams, but I've kind of collected my thoughts of the classes that I would like to see in Trove. And you guys can always sound off in the comments of the classes that you would think would fit with the game. Now, I'm going to be kind of chilling here at the old school hub while we talk about these things. But first and foremost, I think one of the biggest things that they should change about classes moving forward is I would love to see classes that weren't just the generic humanoid character. We're literally talking about a blocky game where they can do basically anything that they want, but for some reason they just refuse to make any type of class interesting. And what I mean by that is you look at all of the roster here, every single one of them has the same archetype of body type, so they're all just humanoids, right? Save for like Lunar Lancer technically kind of leans over and is an animal character and has a tail, which is a step in the right direction in my opinion. But I'm thinking, why don't we have like classes that are super big? Why don't we have classes that envelop like the animal side of things a little bit more? Why don't we have like a Squid character or something? And we'll end up diving into what I think would be cool class ideas. But you gotta keep in mind that these are in no way going to end up coming to Trove. They're not confirmed. I don't even think the devs are going to end up seeing this video, but frankly speaking, I think that they should, because as much as I am really enjoying the newest classes, you know, I'm not saying that I dislike the Bard or Solarian or anything. I'm just saying that I wish they would think a little more outside the box, right? Now, first we're going to hit the more generic characters that I think should be added to the game. I would love to have a two-handed greatsword class in the game. For me personally, I would lean towards it being kind of, let's say, barbarian style, but he would actually have like a two-handed sword. For my money, I would love to have a samurai class, like a full-on dedicated samurai that would be similar to how, you know, the Solarians like the big brother of the Shadow Hunter. I'd like to have a two-handed katana-wielding samurai that would be the big brother to the Neon Ninja. Maybe it would end up having either heaps and heaps of damage or a lot of survivability, because it could end up having abilities that would pull enemies in, or life leech as one of its primary stats, similar to the Revenant. I don't know, that's just my money towards it. You know, I just it wouldn't even have to necessarily be a samurai. I guess it could be a big hulking barbarian, but I'm just sold on the premise of anything that has to do with samurais because I love it. Now the other thing too is there is actually some staff styles for some of the mage characters that you may have noticed are lightsabers, and that made me think that we really need to have like that Darth Maul bow staff character, you know, where it does like a lot of spins and fancy moves with a staff that would, I don't know, it would either do a lot of stunning abilities and stuff, like kind of like a monk class that should be in the game, right? And it would, and the only way that I could picture it is it would have a lot of moves that would stun enemies, maybe like a solar flare ability that would you know, freeze enemies as well, or something like that. It would be a character focused on a lot of CC, a lot of crowd control, right? You know, that's what I think anyways. Now, speaking of another character that's kind of similar to the Neon Ninja, I want a dual dagger thief character. You know, like he'd kind of have a hoodie, maybe have a little bit of a cape drooped over behind him or something, and he would end up like having dual daggers and maybe do spin attacks with them, throw them around kind of like the Neon Ninja with his kunai and stuff. You know, very similar to Neon Ninja. This is a very safe idea for a class that I think they could actually just get away with doing in Trove. But again, I would just like to have that style of variation. Now, another thing too that I wanted to mention before we go further, just because with these class ideas, you might be thinking that I'm suggesting that we have new weapon types added to the game. Frankly speaking, I don't think that we need to. New weapon types are something that is on a whole other level of difficulty for the developers to end up developing. And so that's why these classes that I'm talking about more specifically are kind of sticking to what already exists in terms of classes, except for, you know, the Darth Maul staff character. That would actually be like a new weapon or something. I don't know, maybe they could just have it coded as a melee weapon, but that would be kind of odd. That would be the only class so far that would kind of stand out. All these other classes could get away with just having sword styles. Maybe just the daggers would be like a smaller variation of the sword. I don't know. I would love to have new weapons in the game. I'm not saying I don't want new weapons in the game. I'm just saying that I understand it is a difficult process for the developers, and I think that they could save time by having a lot of these classes just reuse some of the same assets and so on and so forth. Now, I would also love to see a proper Spartan class with a shield. Now, I know we technically kind of have that with the Revenant, where he's got like his shield bash and stuff, and he is using his spear. But I'm talking like this character would be kind of more of a mid-sized character rather than a chunky large character, and he would more specifically have a sword that he would swipe with, and then the shield would be either, you know, something a little bit more defensive. Maybe it could be kind of something like Reinhardt from Overwatch, where you would hold right click and it would end up having a shield effect on all of your allies, similar to the Knight's ultimate ability, where it would negate damage or something like that. I don't know how practical a lot of these class ideas would end up being for Trove. I'm just saying that they would be really, really cool. Like, these are classes that I think would really fit into the game just in terms of being badass, you know, because that's the biggest thing for me is a lot of the classes in Trove, none of them really strike me as super duper cool. If you checked out my, you know, my own class tier list where I rate like my favorite classes in the game, you'll notice that a lot of the classes that I have in the higher portion of the tier list are classes that I think are genuinely like really, really cool, or just have a lot of functionality to them, right? And that's what I lean towards, is I'll end up using a class, even if it's not very good, like I used Shadowhunter for many years before the class ended up getting a rework, because I thought that it was a really cool concept of a character. Just everything about it was very well rounded and felt really, really cool to me. And a lot of these class ideas that I'm mentioning to you guys, I would probably swap to them in a heartbeat. Like, you know, outside of the devs probably making some of their abilities be useless, I generally speaking, a lot of these characters would just be so cool that I feel myself and many others would want to actually main them. Now let's get into some of the weirder classes in the game, okay? So these are going to end up being the classes that would have different body archetypes. So a lot of those other ones that I mentioned, they would follow the same structure as all of these characters, where they would have a humanoid body type and could end up being quite generic and wouldn't have to be, you know, they wouldn't have to break the mold too much, right? But these other ones, I would love to see you know, a spider body character that has a humanoid top, and that would end up being an archer that would end up focusing on poison attacks, you know, where it would end up basically being a class that would have spider legs. They could maybe just make it so that it has mount movement speed coded to the character or something like that, so that you can actually use a mount with it. Or they could go the extra mile and make it so that mounts would actually work with this class. But generally speaking, I think that it would be pretty simple for them to do, because they could just take the animation from any of the spider mounts that we have in the game and use that as the bottom portion of the class. And I don't know, I just think that that would be really cool as a character that would focus on poison clouds, you know, focus on area of effect, you know, stacking damage and stuff like that. Kind of similar to how the Solarian is kind of like our burning class. I would like to see more classes focus on different elemental types. Even if they're superfluous, you know, we don't really have elemental damage in Trove per se. Or maybe we could make it so that poison would end up having a different function, and by stacking poison damage on an enemy, it would actually lower the defensive value of the enemy. So maybe you would need to have less light value in order to end up damaging the enemy, or so on and so forth, right? Now, an alternative option, or even an additional option to the whole poison class, would end up being a Alchemist poison or potion throwing class. Kind of like a witch doctor or something, or a plague doctor, you know, like I think that would be pretty dang cool. It wouldn't necessarily have to be a poison class. It could end up just being a class that focuses on throwing potions, you know, and then they could just easily have that coded as a fist weapon, even though it's technically just using your fist to grab these potions and throw them around. And they could end up having a bunch of different random effects to them, kind of similar to the effects that they have in the Boomeranger's ultimate ability, where it would just be like, okay, well, this ended up draining health, this one ended up stunning the enemies, this one's you know, put slowness on them or something like that. I don't know, it would be one of those wonky classes that I don't think I would be the biggest fan of in Trove, but I know that there's a lot of people that would really enjoy that type of a character just because they're in other games, right? Another one would end up being, this is a class that I talked about a long time ago, which would end up being kind of a Van Helsing werewolf class. So think of something similar to the Vanguardian, where your melee mode would instead be ranged mode. You would end up being like a Van Helsing guy, so you'd be kind of similar to cross between pirate captain and gunslinger, right? Where you'd be using a gun, maybe a rifle, because they teased a rifle class years and years and years ago and we never got one, but it would end up using a rifle class, right? And then maybe eventually you would end up building up your ultimate ability, and it would move from being a trapper slash hunter class, and then when you use your ultimate, it would actually get bigger and transform into a werewolf that would then end up using its claws to swipe at enemies and do kind of similar playstyle to the Vanguard, you know, but maybe end up having a little bit fancier animations to it, where it would end up actually, like, I don't know, running on all fours or something. Maybe that could be the passive. It could have a different passive where when you run for a certain amount of time, eventually you run on all fours and it just gets like mount movement speed or something like that, just because the functionality of the class would always take precedent even over the fact that it would end up being really, really cool. And maybe the class gem ability would make it so that you would just be in run speed all the time. Maybe even have it so that you would get the run speed in Van Helsing mode, so that, you know, it would end up being a class that would actually be useful across the board instead of just using one or the other, you know, as your favorites, right? But I personally think that would be really, really cool. Another one that I thought of years and years and years ago, these are actually my oldest ideas, because when I first started playing Trove, I thought that we would get weirder classes like this, right? So one of those ideas was a Qubesly class. So it would actually be a class specifically focused on building, and it would be able to fit into 1-block spaces. So it would be really, really handy for building structures and so on and so forth. But on top of it, its abilities would actually be kind of similar to the mechanic in Team Fortress 2. So not necessarily the turret, because we've already got that from the pirate captain, but more so that maybe you would use an ability that would place down a temporary structure. You know, maybe something that the player wouldn't necessarily be able to interact with, but maybe enemies would be able to, or maybe it would just place down kind of like a, I don't know, it would be like a transparent build, so it would have its functionality while not necessarily impeding player progress, because I know that that could become a very big problem if someone just starts spam building in a dungeon and then you can't go anywhere, right? Another one, another old school idea I had was a class being, well, a big ogre, you know, like something like maybe 2 times the size of the Revenant, where he would be like maybe this tall, like at our jump height right here. The camera would be a little bit more zoomed out. He'd be a little slower, a little more lumbering, and would end up having very, very slow attack speed. So he'd maybe have like either a big greatsword or a big log, a club or something chilling over his shoulder, and then he would just swing with that, and whoopsie daisy, and then it would end up being really, really good at either like stunning enemies or knocking enemies back. Not really, we don't want knockback in Trove anymore. I mean, frankly speaking, we all want it removed, but I'm just saying that it would just, this was a really, really old idea that I had that would have to, of course, be adjusted for modern Trove, but I think that would fit quite well, frankly speaking. Another option that the tree guy could end up being would be like, I don't know, a big Oni, you know, like a big demon guy or something. Maybe it's like the more damage you do, the more rage you build up, or you know, one of those types of classes where eventually, like, the more rage he has, the more attack speed he has, or I don't know, something very, very simple and archaic like that. And then last idea that I had for you guys is, as I mentioned earlier, kind of a Squid-like character. So this character is very, very open-ended. I'm actually leaning more towards like, it would be like a mage character that would focus on, you know, crowd control and maybe mind control, kind of like a Cthulhu mind flayer type of thing, where it would end up being very similar to a lot of the enemies that we have in the Geode Surface. So kind of one of those Squidward guys, right? But the playstyle would actually be more similar to the Tomb Raiser in terms of like, maybe you would just hold your left click and it would like have like a circle around it or something, that would end up affecting a group of enemies that would, maybe he would benefit from more enemies, you know, being under his control would end up giving him more damage or more lifesteal or something to that effect, right? Just, these are some of the ideas that I've had over the years of Trove that I really, really wish that we would see in this game, you know, kind of more generic like game characters, because I think that Trove's weakest link and you know, this has always been my opinion, Trove's weakest link is the fact that the game plays it very, very safe and doesn't really end up experimenting or trying new things too much, save for ideas like the delves, where frankly speaking nobody asked for it, you know. And that's the thing, is as much as I would give my due diligence to the developers and how they keep developing this game and giving ideas that players haven't even thought of that end up being really, really cool and really, really awesome, I do think that they need to start taking advantage of polls a little bit more often, because, you know, like a year or two ago they had a poll asking what players wanted to see more so in the game, and everybody voted on new classes, and since then we've actually started getting new classes at least once a year, right? And I think that that's amazing. I think that they need to work a little bit more you know, in tandem with the fans and with the people that are still playing this game. And I mean, I'm not necessarily saying this to push an agenda and say that all of these class ideas should be in the game or anything like that, but I'm just saying it as a proof of concept, because I would personally love it if we had classes that would break the mold, if we had more areas in the game and more things that would break the mold and acknowledge the fact that this is a voxel game. The only limitation is the imagination of the people building and the developers working on the game. And so I think that they could really just start pushing in a completely weird direction. And I think it would be, you know, a breath of fresh air. You know, there was, referring back to some of the old school stuff way back in the day, the Lunar Lancer, when it was first coming out in the game, the rumors were that it was going to end up being a rifle class and that we were going to end up getting a moon-themed biome. When the Chloromancer was first rumored, we had, you know, everybody thought that its ultimate ability was going to transform it into a giant, you know, Venus flytrap, similar to the Draco's ultimate, but it would just end up being focused on like a different playstyle. Even when the Pirate Captain was first being introduced, I totally thought that it was going to use a scabbard for its left click and a shotgun for its right click. And unfortunately, time and time again, we've had these classes come out, and not to necessarily imply that they're bad, but definitely disappointing comparatively to our own imagination. Anyways, that's my 2 cents. That's my video for today. You guys can sound off in the comments if you have any video ideas. I'd love to hear them, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Smash like, sub for more, buy the merch you want, support the channel, and take care, guys.